and ensure that there's alignment. No stress. We ensure that there is alignment in the information that we receive to the principal objectives of the JETP investment plan. What we don't do is we don't take a view on the quality and impact of that project, right? So it's important to understand that the grant register records a certain level of information. But as we started continuing this work, as we started engaging with a number of different stakeholders, it became pretty obvious, right, that there are a number of South African institutions, right? But let's just even take it one step further. Small and medium enterprises, NGOs, civil society organizations, trade unions, government departments that are actively working on projects and ideas related to the just energy transition objectives, that we believe, if there was an appropriate mechanism to create visibility on this, would be able to access grant funding from not just the international partner group, but from other grant funders going forward, which is why we developed the funding platform. So the funding platform is recognizing that as we saw the information coming through on the grant register, we see the opportunity to create a mechanism and visibility for South African institutions to participate and to lodge their interest, lodge their projects, and we believe thereby create better access to grant funding for those projects going forward. We're launching it next week, and we'll speak about it in a bit more detail later on around how we want to participate with different stakeholder groups, but hopefully that achieves what you wanted to at this point in time. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jared. And maybe just to say at this point as well that we'll share the slides from this presentation, and perhaps we could also share the invitation details to that launch as well when we do that. And we'll try and gather other relevant pieces of information that come up today. So if you're joining us online, you should be able to get that too. Thank you very much, Jared. That's really helpful. And I think with that, it brings us up to the sort of end of the context of JETPs that we've been talking about. And we're going to want to talk a little bit more about particularly Life After Coal and the Fair Finance Coalition of South Africa, or Southern Africa, and their work on JETP and the work that we've done just to sort of, I guess, establish our credentials a bit, but also explain where we've come to this grant register analysis from. So we've done a number of different pieces of work, and I guess the biggest objective around this is really to try and aid transparency around the JETP process, and to make sure that particularly our constituencies, which is community groups on the ground, people on the ground, have access to the information around this in as transparent a way as possible. And not only that, but are also included in these processes, because ultimately they're the people who are going to be impacted by not only the money coming in, but then the projects that the money facilitates. So that's really, to come to what we're trying to do today, that's what we're trying to do around this grant register, and we'll show in a bit more detail how we've tried to do that. And not only that, but we would be really interested in getting feedback from the people here today and online about the work that we're doing and how we could improve the work as well. So how we could facilitate more transparency in this information. And to say that, with the different groups that are represented on the panel as well, I think we all share this type of objective. And this is quite new. South Africa was the first JETP that was announced. A number of others have been announced since then, but we are trying to figure it out as best we can and to try and make sure that these principles of equity, of transparency and inclusion are central to the JETP process. Okay, so to talk quickly about the work that we've done so far, and I'm not going to touch on all of these points. We have the slides there, so you can go into more detail if you wish. But our work as the Fair Finance Coalition and as Life After Coal has really involved trying to participate or communicate with these different bodies and acronyms that have been set up since the start of the JETP. So we've done that through sending letters, and a lot of the letters have included requests for more information and also more dialogue between ourselves as civil society representatives and these different stakeholders. We also have tried to, again, forefront communities and wider civil society in this process. So in 2022, we hosted a town hall where, and this largely came about through our struggle to get interactions with the various entities at that point. We really wanted community and civil society's voice to be heard. So we brought people together in a town hall, a meeting where we were able to voice the demands and the type of interest that civil society had in this process. I think civil society recognized early on that this was going to be a really fundamental process in South Africa as we shift, from not only our energy systems, but just for development in South Africa in general. And so I really wanted to focus on that and allow or facilitate a space where voices could be heard. So that was the town hall that happened at the end of 2022. We continued commenting on the various plans that we've already spoken about that came out. We tried to participate wherever possible in the consultations or information sharing sessions that the various bodies have held. And importantly, at the beginning of this year, we released a set of principles around just energy transition partnerships, not only in South Africa, but with civil society representatives in other recipient countries, so countries receiving money through JETPs. We got together, spoke with them, those countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Senegal. We spoke regularly, and that ended up in developing these principles that we launched in 2024, principles that we think the JETP should subscribe to as we go forward. And then obviously what we're here today to speak about the JETP register and the report, and there are other processes continuing, particularly also with public finance institutions like the Development Bank of Southern Africa, because these bodies are going to be crucial in the JETP process, in making sure that the money flows to the right places, that it is done transparently, that there is oversight over that. So we continue to work with public finance institutions, and that's a focus of the Fair Finance Coalition as well. Some of the activities around this JETP work also includes more broadly trying to facilitate the understanding of these processes, of climate finance processes and of public finance institutions. And to that end, the Fair Finance Coalition in Southern Africa has developed a Fair Finance School. And that school essentially aims to facilitate people's involvement in these conversations. So to understand what is happening in the world of climate finance, and particularly of public finance institutions' involvement in that, to give them a good understanding of that, to build their capacity to help people participate in these processes as they come about. We've got to a stage now where participants of the original school are currently hosting their own schools. And this is not only in South Africa, but also in other African countries. This year, we'll have schools in South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal. We continue to look at public policies as they come out and to interrogate those, and to try and hold oversight of public finance institutions and multilateral development banks. And again, I think one of the key aspects of the town hall I spoke about earlier was that it was proactive. So to not only wait to be asked what our opinions or what our input is, but also to try and proactively give that as well. And we've done that in a number of ways. The next slide is very text heavy. I won't go into it in detail, but essentially these are the definitions of a just transition framework. And they came out of that just transition framework process. And I think it's really important to have them here and to present them here to make sure that we're all on the same page about what we talk about when we talk about a just transition. Importantly, and when we move to the the Life After Coal's open agenda on a just transition, it really tries to forefront that in light of those, or those definitions as a background, what is it that civil society views of a just transition? What do they want out of a just transition? And this document it's available online. It's a really in-depth discussion and look at what people in civil society and the communities that they have as their constituents think about a just transition. So I'd also encourage you to look into that in more detail. Okay, so we've spoken a lot about the sort of work that we've done. To come quickly just to the priority areas, because we'll be talking about the priority areas today a lot as we talk about the grant register, because the grant register supports certain of these priority areas. The ones that have been laid out for the just energy transition are the 9 that are listed on the screen. And this really shows that the just energy transition, while some people may think of it only as sort of impacting electricity, and I think with load shedding in the recent past in South Africa, we still think very much of the electricity crisis and what that means. And I think it might mean that when people hear of a just energy transition, they think only of electricity. But I think looking at these priority areas, we can really see that it is a lot broader, this just transition that we're embarking upon. Okay, so to come to the grant register itself, and then I'm going to hand over to Leanne. I'm just quickly going to present the resources that we have, and as you can see, they're in the presentation. And as soon as I hand over to Leanne, I'll also put the links in the chat for those of you who are online who may not want to see them there too. But this is our attempt to take the grant register and really try and present it in as accessible a manner as possible. And so I'm quickly going to switch to show you the website. Please bear with me.
Nice picture.
Thank you. I don't think everyone's seeing. I hope not everyone is seeing that. So this is on the Fair Finance Coalition's website, which is fairfinanceSouthernAfrica.org, and you can navigate to it through the Just Energy Transition Partnership section at the top. And this web page is essentially the web page for this grant register work that we've done and the analysis. And we'll also hear from the researcher Lydia Crosset, who's on the call virtually, and she will be speaking with Leanne about the work in a bit more detail. But I just wanted to give you a sense of how we've presented it. So there's a short introduction, and then opportunities to download the report, the briefing on the grant register, and then the tables. These are the summary tables that we've essentially developed through the grant register itself. So we've tried to summarize the information in a spreadsheet that you can download there if you want to really dig into the details. There's then a map, an interactive map that shows you where the money is coming from. So the red pointers show the different places, and you can hover over that and get a sense of what those particular countries or entities are giving to the Just Energy Transition Partnership in South Africa. They're also grouped under those priority areas again. So for instance, with the UK, you can see they're supporting a number of priority areas, a total of 45 grants under those different priority areas, to a total amount of 738 million. And then likewise for the others, you can hover over those and get a sense of where they come from as well. The Accelerating Coal Transition Implementation Plan is also there, investment plan is also there. And you can, as they're obviously another geographical entity there displayed on the map too. Then lastly, we have this table which shows the grants.
Yeah.
Sorry, we'll try and keep people muted as they come in. So the table at the bottom shows you all of the different grants. It shows them by the different priority areas again, and also a total of all the grants. And as you click through those, the information in the table changes. And in the table, you see the description of the grant, who the implementing entity is, where the source of the funding is, and then the totals in both dollars and rands. So you can go through them there. And then importantly, you're also able to search through keywords or others, all of the tables here. and that will show up specific information related to your search. So just to give you an overview of the website, Leanne, do you want to go?
Yeah, no, thanks, Glenn. I think quite importantly, the reason that we have reorganized the information from the presidency's website and from the JET grant mapping register is it was really difficult to try and navigate on that register. If you were looking for information on how many grants have come from a particular country, that was really difficult to figure out, or looking for information on how much has been allocated to green hydrogen. Again, it's hard to navigate, and the information doesn't appear consistently across the register. So we tried to reorganize as best we can and present it in a much friendlier manner. And I'm hoping that this work also it enables the IPG, the PMU, to kind of understand what it is that civil society is looking for in assessing this information and in wanting to access information. So I wanted to mention that very quickly and say that if you go to the table section of this website, you'll be able to have specific information on how much has been allocated by different countries, but then also breaking it down according to different priority areas. I think that the tables are also really useful if you want a snapshot. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. And I'm going to take that opportunity just to copy the URL and drop it in the chat for those of us online so they can see it too. Great. I'm going to switch back to the presentation quickly. We'll get another opportunity for that photo. All right. And I think with that, I'm going to hand over to Leanne, and Leanne will in turn bring in Livia to talk a bit about this particular work in a bit more detail. And then after that, we'll turn to the panel. So over to you, Leanne.
Fantastic. Thank you, Glenn. All right. So, well, maybe just to take us back one step, right? So the JET grant register was first published in November 2023. It was updated in July 2024. And it comprises a list of grants between November 2021 and 2030. And importantly, because we'll come back to this point, it refers to grants from original, new, and non-IPG members. So we have a definition in the report on what that means and the distinction between that. So please do have a look at the report. We have the link on the slide as well. And Diane is going to share it on the chat. Right now, there isn't an equivalent register for concessional loans, commercial loans, and guarantees, which means essentially that information related to about 93% of the total 11.7 billion USD is not publicly available. But the PMU has confirmed that a register for concessional loans is being developed as a key priority. So grants are allocated in accordance with the several priority areas that Glenn referred to previously, as listed in the JET Investment and Implementation Plan. Also important to note that the initial pledge in 2021 was 8.5 billion. But in 2023, the pledges by new and non-IPG members totaled 11.6 billion USD and 11.7 billion according to the presidency website. And we'll come back to why there is that discrepancy, right? So one of the things I wanted to hand over to Livia about is, the process of compiling this information and putting together the report. We wanted to reflect a little bit on that process and how we have tried to ensure that the information that we've obtained was also checked through partners working on this or to those holding this information. Livia, I know you're online. If you'd like to unmute and tell us a little bit about your methodology. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. So something that was important for us, as Leanne just discussed, was to be in conversation with stakeholders for this just energy transition. So throughout the process of looking at all these different official documents, from the earliest grant mapping register to the investment plan implementation plans and the newest grant register, was to actually be in conversation with these stakeholders. So what we did was share earlier forms of the report to IPG members, and where possible, these were able to comment. We took all these comments into consideration, of course, and also entered into conversation with the PMU in August time, so that all of their comments and suggestions could be added into the report, and so that it could be as accurate as possible at the time. Yep, so that's me.
Thank you so much, Livia. All right, to get back to the report, right? Essentially, we have fact-based information based on the register on the presidency's website on grant allocations, sources of funding, priority areas, and implementation entities, as well as on financial flows and intermediaries and contracts that have been signed to date. This is really a snapshot, and we tried to also present a chronological understanding of financial flows, because we picked up from the report, from the register actually, that it is important to understand what was the chronology and how have things moved to date, how many projects have been completed to date, what is an implementing entity, right? So we try and define that. And we try and unpack the role of development finance institutions. The Fair Finance Coalition, the Life After Coal campaign, a number of civil society organizations are involved in monitoring the work of development finance institutions, asking for reform and refinement of their policies so that that policy change eventually leads to better engagement with civil societies, publication of due diligence reports, publication of contracts, etc. So that was an important component of the work that we've done in the report itself. And importantly, because there has been so much interest from civil society on green hydrogen projects, we've tried to have a focus in the report on the green hydrogen projects, how much has been allocated, to whom, and by whom. And we'll go through that shortly. So in the next slide, what we outline here, and this is a really useful table which appears in the report, is we outline the total allocated grants as of July 2024, which you can see accounts for 5% or 613.2 million USD of the total international partner pledge. If you look at the table, and I hope it's quite visible on your side, you can see we have all the different IPG partners, non-IPG partners, or new partners listed there, the different countries, as well as what's coming from the Act to Accelerated Coal Transition investment plan. And we've got what did they commit to or pledge in the investment plan? And then what did they commit to, what was reflected in the initial grant mapping register published in November last year? Then how did that reflect against the implementation plan, and now in the latest grant mapping register? What's quite important is that if you look at the information in the latest grant mapping register compared to the presidency's website, you'll find that there's 821 million as a total in the presidency website, compared to 613 million USD in the grant mapping register. And that difference is because there are pledged grants and then there are planned grants. And the presidency's website includes planned grants, or the question and answer session on the presidency's website includes planned grants. And one of the things that we do say in the report is it's useful to make that distinction between planned and what's being pledged. And it helps us to understand what's going on, because when you see discrepancies of this amount, it causes a lot of people to wonder what is the reason behind it and why. Okay, so this is quite an important table, and one of the things that we've also picked up on is, if you look at the different priority areas, and I think we can move on to the next slide. If we look at the different priority areas and how they are organized, you'll see, this is on the actual grant mapping register, you'll find that there are some priority areas where you have descriptions that are more detailed than others. So in navigating the the grant mapping register on the presidency's website, you'll be able to see detailed information on some projects or not on other projects. You'll be able to understand some more information on what's currently being implemented versus what's being planned, right? And then you wouldn't find information on the non-IPG members, which omits a significant part of the funding. And so for a variety of reasons, right, related to the nature and type of information, a direct comparison between the figures listed in the grant registers and the investment and implementation plan isn't viable. And you'll find more information about this on the report. Again, the grant register lists some information on key beneficiaries under detailed description columns, right? But there's lack of clarity on roles and functions. So one of the things that we say in the report is standardize this information so that it's all reported on consistently. And the inclusion of hyperlinks in the grant register could have been really useful to help solve some of these issues so that you're able to track an entire project lifecycle from funding to implementation. Because that's essentially what we want to do here. We want to, in different areas, be able to track projects and say, where is the funding coming from? What is it for? What is it being used for? And how do we monitor it in a much more meaningful manner? So it remains difficult to map the chronological flow of funds from source to implementing entity and the capacity in which each intermediary is involved, which is another difficulty, right? So in the slide, we describe here what financial intermediaries are. Financial intermediaries can include the Development Bank of Southern Africa or the Industrial Development Corporation, and they follow their own policies and processes in overseeing projects or processing funds. And at the same time, implementing entities, right, can include a wide variety of actors, including NGOs, specialized governance structures that have been put in place or are pre-existing, and they play a role in the project management and implementation, but there's limited information on those implementing entities, on how they are governed and how they should disclose information. So we do need more clarity on financial flows and intermediaries, contracts, and the role of DFIs. To move on to, before I move on to the green hydrogen section, I do want to say that if you look at, for example, the summary in the investment plan, you see that the European Union, for example, offers funds through the European Investment Bank, and most of the IPG partners list the different financial intermediaries. But for new and non-IPG members, it's not clear exactly who the intermediary is. And so that, I think, needs to be made much clearer going forward, because it helps civil society identify what intermediaries are involved and who do we approach if we have questions or we need to utilize grievance mechanisms. Okay, on green hydrogen, what we find is that about 141, surrounding it of 141 million USD in grant pledges are allocated to green hydrogen projects between the timeframe 2021 to 2029. And lenders and implementing entities include the KfW, the UK Pact, Tetra Tech, World Bank, the Webster Group, Sasol Germany, and others. And there are 2 green hydrogen projects that have undefined implementing entities, which is problematic because we need to understand who's actually implementing these projects. We also need a lot more information on the listed implementing entities and how they relate back to the IPG members themselves, right? We want to see what the relationship is and how funds are moving between the IPG countries and different entities. So please do have a look at the report in more detail around the green hydrogen allocations, because I know there's a lot of interest in this, and we hopefully can deal with some questions, during the Q&A. Quite importantly for us is that intermediary entities are responsible for reporting and tracking the status of each project on the JET results monitoring system. This platform is not yet publicly available. And I think this is quite crucial that we get this done. We don't just need a JET results monitoring system, but we also need a review of where are we right now. We've counted the number of projects and that are completed to date, and right now we're sitting at 73 completed projects. So we need to have a system of reviewing those projects. A lot of those projects were pre-feasibility. There were a number of studies. There was research that was involved. Where are the outcomes of those pieces of research? Can we access them? Because they are essential for us to understand what's possible. What is the innovation that is possible, and how can we as civil society participate in that? I think we can move to the next slide, but and I'm mindful of the time as well. But on the access to contracts, a lot of civil society organizations have asked for actual contracts because it provides insight into the status of the project and the nature and scope of the project. Through our engagement with the IPG, it has been clarified that some of this information is confidential, right? So we need to consider what information in the public interest should be available in a redacted form, so that we have access to contract terms and conditions, because there's huge amounts of money flowing into the country, and I think it would benefit everyone if civil society is in a position to better track that. I do want to highlight that there are country-specific platforms that the IPG members have provided information from, such as the Development Tracker, which is IATI compliant, and this relates to a website that the United Kingdom has put together. And it publishes key grant contract information. But again, it was through our engagement with the IPG partners that we were able to access this. So if there are hyperlinks that could be put into the grant register that says, okay, for more information, go here, and you'd be able to access this, it would be really, really important. On the involvement of DFIs, we need to have a lot more information on their role, on how they will make information available, on how they will use the reporting system, etc. So I think DFI involvement in this process is really critical, and we are noting that the DBSA and the IDC will play a critical role as holding functions together with the PMU as part of a just transition finance mechanism. We need clarity on what exactly that looks like, and how do we as civil society participate in relation to the mechanism. I think I just wanted to finish my part of the presentation. Maybe we can move to the next slide. Is we have a number of conclusions and recommendations related to what could be done better. Noting that an immense amount of work has been done already. All these processes are ongoing. And we have to communicate more consistently and clearly across a number of stakeholders to improve on these processes. Essentially, we have said that we need clarity. So JET documents must be much clearer, more consistent, in order to be accessible and comprehensible for all stakeholders. There must be transparency in making information available. Receive information from civil society on what it is that we need for the purposes of transparency, because it may be that we don't need all information, but we need specific information to enable us to do our work. And then accountability. So we need to understand who's doing what in all of these processes, in the line, especially in terms of reporting and monitoring. And so it's essential that we're moving into a different space here, where at the beginning, we didn't understand what was really going on. Information was being withheld. Civil society was concerned about access to information. We held the JETP town hall. We must now move into a space where we build faith in the JET governance system, encourage constructive collaboration with CSOs. And I hope that through this process and other processes, we're able to do that. Thank you all for bearing with me through a very long presentation. Handing back over to you, Glenn.
Thanks very much, Deanne. Yeah, a long presentation, but I think really detailed and really useful to get a good sense of the work that we've done. And yeah, just definitely to say thank you to you and Livia I think you've been the main drivers of this work, and it's, I think it's, yeah, the outcomes show the use of it. Great. So that is essentially the end of all me and Leanne talking, hopefully. I'm sure we'll come in at times. I also just want to note that we're seeing the chat. So those of you online, thank you. Do keep introducing yourself on the chat. It's great to see who's there if you haven't seen that request in the chat. And do also please continue to ask questions, make comments in the chat too. We'll try and keep an eye on those and bring those into the room and into the conversation as we go. We're now going to turn to the panel, and thank you again to everyone on the panel. I will quickly introduce the panel. I'll quickly introduce the panel. We do have their bios up on the screen, so you can read a bit more because I won't go into a lot of depth. And then we have some questions that we'd like to ask of the panel, just to kick things off, to give each of you between 5 and 10 minutes to reply to those questions. You may want to bring in some other observations from what Leanne's presented as well. That would be great. And then we'll throw it open to everyone, to those of you online, to the others in the room. If you have additional questions, we'll have a chance to ask those and hopefully get some answers as well as we go. All right, so firstly, just to introduce the panel, Michelle is online, so she's not in the room with us today, but Michelle Kravaken joins us from Groundwork. I think most people working in civil society or even in wider South Africa know Groundwork and their fantastic work they've done around the country. So thank you very much, Michelle, for joining us. Jared, you've already spoken, Jared Moodley from the project management unit, and so has introduced himself somewhat, so thank you for being here. And then Kholelwa and Andile, two people working with Grassroots for Climate Action. Kholelwa joins us from the Eastern Cape and Andile from here in Gauteng, but I know both of you work quite a wide geographic area, so thank you for joining us. And then lastly but not least, Gail Wardener, joins us from the United Kingdom government. She is also representing the IPG, so the International Partners Group. So thank you very much for engaging with us, Gail. And I know this isn't the first engagement the IPG has had with us, so we appreciate that. I appreciate you being here to talk with us and hopefully also answer some questions. So that's our panel. We'll then move into the questions that we have for them. And I think we're going to, one of the things I think I mentioned early on was I also wanted to mention that Lydia is also answering some questions in the chat as well. So thank you, Lydia, for that about the research itself. I mentioned in the beginning that one of our objectives was to try and increase the transparency around the grant register and the JETP in general. And one of the ways we've tried to do that is to include civil society voices on the panel and also invited lots of people to join the discussion as well. So we'd like to start off with Andile and Kholelwa to answer them some of the questions, because our hope is that through doing this work, we can not only increase the transparency, but also find ways to improve the way we do that. How can we improve transparency? How can we improve inclusion of civil society in these sorts of processes? Because I think at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to do. And as we all move towards justice in the energy transition.
Glenn, I think Michelle is also online, and I think she's taking the first question.
Thank you for reminding me. Sorry, it's my virtual blind spot. Thank you, Leanne. So with that, Michelle, could we turn to you? If you're able to put your video on, that's great, but fine to not as well. But the first question is, Michelle, could you, and then we'll come to you, Andile and Kholelwa, could you reflect on the need for this kind of CSO review and the ways in which the publication of this sort of information can be used by civil society and community partners? Because I know in your work with Groundwork, you do a lot of work with civil society groups. So could I hand over to you to answer that, Michelle?
Yeah, sure. And Glenn, stop me in terms of time, because I think we're all answering. So yeah, I think we welcome this register as Groundwork and LAC. I think it's a very big step towards procedural justice. But I think that there are many, many steps, that we need towards inclusion of civil society in the JETP processes. So I think, you spoke about the transparency and the access to information. So I think that that really speaks to the need that civil society has, that you're addressing through this initiative. And I think what it will do is inform, how civil society decides what their plans are and what they want to focus on. Because, in particular, areas like clean energy, social ownership, labor, jobs, diversifying local economies, these all really speak to civil society. So it's useful for them to have access to this information. I think that as far as it reaching broader civil society, we really need to look at how we popularize this through popular education. So I think that, there's something that we can learn there. But I think for the moment, it's really important that this information does reach them. I think that the access of opportunities for funding, that's quite challenging. Is how do civil society and community organizations access funds? So, we really have to look at how we look at readiness. So how, proposal writing, how do organizations become registered? How are funds governed, if they do flow towards civil society, and what kind of absorption rate civil society have. So, in a nutshell, I think the inclusion is important. We've got to create the linkages for civil society, and then also look at how governance will happen, I think, through this process. So I'm gonna stop there and give everyone else also an opportunity to speak.
Thanks very much, Michelle. I'm just going to bring the questions back up so people can see them. Thanks, Michelle, for that answer. We're going to turn to, I think, to both Andile and Holewa now, and you're welcome to maybe Holewa, seeing as you're sitting closer to me, you could start and then hand over to Andile as well. But to really focus on this question of how are communities receiving this information? Are they receiving this information, and could it be done in a better way? So the question is phrased as, can you tell us your understanding of the JET Grant Mapping Register and your experience of engaging with communities and sharing the information? Is there anything that's in what Leanne's presented and what we've presented on the website that has struck you about being interesting or important about this review itself? So it would be great to respond from your personal side, and also maybe to give us an insight with the communities that you work with. How is this information landing with them as well?
Okay.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Regarding my own understanding of the grant mapping register, of the view that the grant register is there to map the funders with the projects. For the longest time, we as a society, or I myself as a society, we always believed that the country's only pledged about 4% of the money, and we're still waiting for the funds to come in. So looking at the register, we're finding that actually some projects started way back in 2021, and yet in the register, there is no report about the past projects, how they went. Did they do the job where they bring about the sustainability or economic sustainability? Did they bring about the jobs that was promised that the DFIs are supposed to be doing? So there is actually no report about that. So this year, since I'm from the Grassroots for Climate Action, we obviously follow the proceedings of the PCC. Then we got to hear that actually there's money already that came in. There's funds that already came in, that trickled in. And what struck me quite interesting was to see that, like in the priority projects, there's green hydrogen that's getting a huge chunk of the money. While as a civil society, we attended participated in the public participation. Well, the companies from Germany, as a register stands now, it's not even quite clear from us who are the funders, who's funding who. It actually reminds me of the song Who's Fooling Who. Because from my point of view, it gives out that feeling that actually the funders from the IPG are funding their own projects that are based here in South Africa, because there's no transparency or way of seeing it, who's funding who. Biggest chunk going to the green hydrogen, but when you even the companies that were hired to do the workshops, participating in some of them, they can't even quite tell us about what really is the green hydrogen. The biggest chunk of money went to feasibility study. So I'm thinking to myself, how can a huge chunk of the funds go to something that is not even quite, how can I put it? Now I'm lost for the right word, but I'm thinking to myself, still holding those public participation and making the civil society involved is just a fuss.
It's speculative. The projects are speculative.
It's speculative. It's just bringing there to say, okay, we have ticked 1, 2, 3, but actually, I think somehow it's already been decided that we're going up with the green hydrogen because with the grant register, it's getting the hugest part of the grants or the funding. So who is actually following who here? Because it's the funders or the grant or the register is supposed to be showing us who's funding which project. Are these for the benefit of the civil society here in South Africa, or are these not? Because now when I look at it, and when you're trying to pass the information to the civil society on the grassroots, they can't even really grasp. Me, myself, and I also can't really grasp. But now with the review that you have brought us, it actually made it simpler. It actually put it much simpler so that we can compare. We can even see the discrepancies. Why is it now 800 while it was supposed to be 600 and something? So I'm grateful for the review now, because you can actually quite explain it to the concerned civil society. Because while you're passing the information, they're just hearing billions of rands, while they don't even see the money. And the main concern is South Africa is already in debt. So with the money that's gonna not just be grants, but it's gonna be consensual loans also, which is also not transparent in the grant register. So are we then putting the country into more debt? How is it gonna affect the civil society? Are we gonna getting now worse livelihoods, or is it going to be better? So people are still struggling to just adapt to those just transitions. So imagine now with this mapping and the information missing, we don't even know it's missing, because it's still, I'm hearing the PMU is still gonna finish the missing information, but some of it is confidential. So how is it now going to be really transparent to the civil society?
Thank you. Thanks, Khairwa. Andile, the same question for you, but the question number 3 as well, perhaps you could also reflect on a bit, which is what are the communities concerned about and how we can address those concerns. So I think Khairwa has already touched on that a bit, but if you'd like to sort of jump between both of those questions as well, that would be great to hear. Thank you.
Mic not too far?
I think it's okay. If people online are struggling to hear, please just shout and we'll move mics around and things, but we did test it earlier and it should be okay. So go for it.
Thank you very much, Claire, and for the amazing work you did. Really simplified how we can look at the JET register. And thank you to Gerald as well, to avail himself, with us being here. Usually people don't come when we are around, even Gabe yourself, because, the status quo about society being very, I think my colleagues spoke a mouthful. Thank you, Tolela. And then even Michelle, she touched on something that I was going to go and in depth on after, watching the presentation. She touched on the procedural justice. So now if maybe I can just allude a bit how I come into this part of the just transition. When earlier on you did a presentation on how we started from the formation of the PCC, that's when the Grassroots for Climate Action actually started to monitor the processes of the JET, of the PCC, up to a point where we did the JTF, the Just Transition Framework, which it enshrined 3 justices, which was the procedural justice, restorative justice, and distributive justice. Now, coming back to communities, because as we get this information, we have a duty to go back to our communities and translate this information and make it easy. So the question that keeps coming is that but is this information meant for us? Because there's a word that they use in my community, to be in particular, that it sounds like it has a to whom it concerns. You know, when you write a letter and say to whom it concerns, meaning it's not, it doesn't have a name, it doesn't have a direction to say it's going to these particular communities who are impacted. I'll give you an example. When you think about the inequality of the distribution of information, wealth, and pollution. Let me go there. Example, Sasol. Sasol, their plant is in Sekunda, but their head office is in Senti. So now when we have a document that speaks about the finances, does it go to Sekunda where there's people, there's communities who are frontline to the impacts of climate change, who are upfront to the poly crisis, dealing with unemployment, ageism, sicknesses caused by this pollution, or it goes to Senti? As an example, when I'm using Sasol to say, the community feels that way, to say this information, as when we started, we'd explain the justices and say there's a part that is distributive justice where all the risks and benefits must be equal. But we feel like even the information is not fair. It goes to certain people, it doesn't go to them, or it does not speak to them. Imagine, Leanne, if you look at this document and you looked at it for the first time, even yourself, someone who's running a school of fair finance, who's been in the civil society space, including self-claim, it was hard for you to grasp what's going on here. The information that is missing, what is this? Importantly, would attend a meeting with the JTFM, and we think there's still mechanisms that are still in place. And the document, I think a couple of months ago, Gerard, was endorsed now, and then you come back, you find that money's already been allocated. So those are discrepancies which, when we go back to our communities and we tell them these things, they feel like we're lying. It's really eroding the soil under our feet as civil society to make us look like we're not sure about what we're saying, because we're saying one thing, but on the ground or on the media, something different. And to add, last not to take time, remember the communities that we go and advocate on, they come from remember COVID, the pandemic. So now they understood how information works when it is easier to get to them. With the COVID funds, remember there was the SRD, the Social Relief Fund. It was easy accessible. Ask anyone. If you want to ask anyone about the 350, everybody would know. Whether you have a phone to use it, if you don't have the phone to apply, you know someone who can do it for you. It was word of mouth accessible, this information. It was not for a select few. It was very procedural. So when people come from that experience where they were included in a big mammoth pandemic like the COVID, so when we come to the just transition, then they feel, but why can't you apply the same mechanism? Especially when information and how the funds will be distributed, to say it's easy accessible to information. Leanne, you spoke about transparency, to say we must move from transparency to visibility and accessibility. We must see it happen the same way they saw the SRD funds accessible to them. They'll see, if you want to apply for this fund, this is where you go. So the same thing, our communities are calling for that, to say with this funding, it must be accessible, and we must see some certain level of visibility. To say, if you want to go, if you need funding for this, way you go. And if somebody got the funding, what did they do with it? But for instance, now the JET register speaks about the grants, right, which were pledged, and it doesn't speak about the loans. It's funny that now the grants are done in isolation, in silos. We don't want to wake up one day to find ourselves like we're indebted as a country. But when there were grants, they will just they'll let us know who received the grants. But the loans, nobody's talking about it. It's a gray area there. Because, for instance, last example, with the ESCOM, which is part of the priority area, which is electricity, right? When they do the multi-year price determination, that information comes out directly to everyone. You know who's going to get impacted. But with this one, we're not directly communicated to know that this is how it's going to impact me. If it's a grant, how do I access it? If it's going to be a loan, how is it going to affect me? Because as you know, prices usually get passed down to the end consumer. Like when ESCOM right now, they're owing. They will take that money, and whatever costs they incur, they're going to pass it back to the end consumer. So I just want to end there. Thank you very much.
And Dile, and sorry, Glenn, before you bring Gail into the conversation, and we have Sis Lindy as well from Grassroots for Climate Action. Yeah. The thing that I'd really like to understand, and we've had the privilege as Fair Finance and LAC of engaging with Grassroots for Climate Action, and I want to applaud the work that you have been doing.
Thank you.
It is across the country. It is embedded in so many different community organizations, and I really do want to say, well done on that work, and to Earthlife Africa as well for being a key convening partner. What do you see as the role for, let's say, Life After Coal and Fair Finance in helping to bridge the gap of that, the lack of information, or is it about how the information is translated? Is it a language? Is it also a language issue? How do we help move forward in helping to ensure that community members are building trust with this process, and are able to also raise their concerns and have them addressed in a meaningful way?
Should I take it? So I think we need more collaborations when you work with us. I think the last time we had a meeting with you, I think the PMU was having a meeting as well regarding the JET register, but we were not invited as civil society. And remember, our constituencies, whenever they have questions, they come to us because we've built trust over the years with our communities directly. So those collaborations that you don't have, we don't skip any part of communication between yourselves and us. Because now we don't want a situation like we're seeing now, where we go back to our communities and say, we are having a healthy collaboration, like we have a partnership with Earthlife. We work. Every process we are involved in the decision. As a country, we're very consultative. People understand that, to say, okay, now if we need information about the process, the stage of the funding, the grants, this civil society organization would have the information, only to find that we're not being told, like the last previous meeting with the PMU, we're not invited, and it was a civil society meeting, Jared, if I'm wrong, and correct me. But we were with you, Leanne. Remember having a meeting as community leaders. Remember, as a forum, we come from different constituencies. Others come from Limpopo, Eastern Cape, and us in Gauteng. So now when we have to go back and tell them that we did not know. For instance, remember I think it's COP 27, when the JETP was announced. It was just announced without us. We're just dealing with the framework, knowing that it got endorsed, and then they go to COP and they announce it as if we've endorsed it, we've consulted against it. So consulted on it. And then what does it do? It breaks the trust we have with communities. It breaks the trust at the grassroots level. It affects us and impacts us. So to answer your question, how can we work? Is to collaborate, but more than in a transparent way, in a visible way. We must not only be thought to be doing something, we must be seen to be doing something. Every time we have this meeting, so with us in our charter as a forum, we have this thing. Every other meeting after we're done, we must go back and give a feedback to say, colleagues, community, this is where we are right now with the processes. For instance, now, Gerald, you're gonna have a launch next week. It would be nice for us to be invited as well. So there's consistency in our collaboration to know that we don't just see you in this meeting. Like last time we saw you was at JTFM. We saw you there with engagement, it's passed, it's launched, we move on. 6 months, we don't see you, we don't have access to your department, then things move, because things are really moving very fast. And lastly, now approaching COP29, we don't want to be shocked and surprised to hear new announcements at the South African Pavilion, again, where we don't know. Because we are also, as well, we are rebuilding trust with our communities to say, where we've done wrong in the past, where we seem not to have communicated properly or not having information, but moving forward, we have committed to see, no, if we have representatives in these platforms, you guys would know, and this is the process. So the call is transparent and visible collaborations from us. Thank you.
Thanks.
And to just add on what Andela has just said, you are on the right track, because you are the community civil society needs a simplified information, because sometimes it seems like a jargon when you get to the even with the amounts is in USD, trying to convert that into South African rands is quite difficult. Because you're thinking yourself how to go about it. I mean, imagine someone there in the rural Eastern Cape who have to deal with that information. So you're on the right track. And another thing that will work is having information that is current. It's bad enough to report on something that has passed. For example, with the implementation plan, the implementation plan was announced while there were projects already that were implemented. So how do you then build the trust of the civil society when you're announcing things that have already like in motion. So if we can get the current information, report it as we get it, as something that is currently happening, not in the past. And because people now are concerned now with the grants, how is the civil society going to get the grant fund? Is it going to be the same system as with the tendering system? Is the civil society really going to benefit from that? So we need to have all that information so that we can pass it on. So it makes it easier for them also to go and apply for these grants.
Thanks, Toleka.
Sis Lindy, did you want to come in?
Okay. No, I think they've said enough, so we're just still coming to civil society, like, I mean, organizations like your Finance, love the call. I think for us as FFCSA, as we also follow and engage in the PCC, mostly we found that the terms that are using are very, very complicated. But when you come, when civil society like yours and some organization like yours, and you can try to simplify it for us, and then we take it to the communities. I think what you are doing, you are making also our work easier. But also going to the communities, because it's very difficult for just telling somebody that, hey, we have this much money in our country and for this. Once you mention about that, they're like, okay, where's the money? Want to see it, want to see something. Because in our communities, we believe in seeing things. So this term that they are using now, that let's move, let's do as we move. Let's have something practical that will talk, that will tell us about this just transition that we're talking about. And if there's monies, who's benefiting? Let's see. If there's a project, let's see. I will make an example on that, because as communities, we also have a program that is called Socially Owned Program. So when we're educating the community about renewable energy, about sustainable systems of solar panels, we had this program whereby people, okay, so this is the system that we want. This is something sustainable that we would ask if there's monies, we would like to have programs like this ones, because they're seeing it and it's sustainable. So that program gives them hope if that we are moving into renewable energies, and this is what we would vote for, because they are seeing it. So as a grant register, as we move forward, let's implement as we go. Let's see something that will also make people buy into this. I was talking about money only and seeing that these funds are being distributed. Somebody is phasing out. I mean, people are having something out of this, and there's nothing that we can talk about. And then it makes it difficult for us even it is very difficult, because on the ground we believe in saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I think, some time to move to Jared and Gail to hear your responses. I think the people we've heard from so far on the panel have raised a lot of what we as civil society can do, and how perhaps this register and the analysis of it has helped. But I think it's a two-way street as well, and we also need to hear from the IPG that Gail is representing, and the PMU that Jared's representing. How can civil society has a role to play here, and how can we also assist in making sure that this transparency, this inclusion that we're striving for, can come about? So to turn to you, Jared, and I'm sure there's a lot you probably want to respond to from what's been raised as well. You're welcome to do that, but if you could also talk a little bit about the opportunities for oversight and collaboration with civil society as well. So what role can civil society play over and above the monitoring of the projects and the review of information being published by the PMU, which essentially is what we've tried to do here. So can I hand over to you?
Yeah, sure. I think maybe let's start with, for the purposes of this sort of discussion, I want to try and I don't want to keep it separate, but I want to talk about the grant register, and then I want to talk about the funding platform. And I think firstly, just to say, amazing work to the team. And I would love for that to continue, right? Because I can promise you that we're learning from this work that's been done. We've discussed just yesterday the fact that there's going to be a new iteration of the grant register that gets developed. And I think that in itself is a very important point for people to know, that the grant register is constantly changing. It's constantly getting better, we believe, but it's good to have these sort of external perspectives. So, I mean, obviously within the presidency and the PMU, we have our own governance processes and forums, but having that external perspective is always important to get to better outcomes. So that must continue, right? And I think your question was, well, how do we go beyond that? But I hope I'm being very clear around the fact that we really welcome this type of work. And we hope it continues, and we genuinely believe because of this, we will get better at developing a grant register that is more understandable, and that can meet the requirements of more and more people. And we still have a way to go. So it's work in progress, but we have to show progress, right? On the funding platform, because I think a lot of the points raised, we're trying to address it with the funding platform. And I think that I'm going to refer to the points made around collaboration and visibility. And then you made a point on what we see, so around access. And so the funding platform in its design, it's trying to match projects across different, we call it beneficiary sets, right? So that includes SMMEs, that includes CSOs generally, NGOs generally. It includes trade unions and labor, because we realize that protecting labor is very important, reskilling is very important. And it also includes government departments. Because within the implementation plan, I think it's quite clear to everyone that there needs to be a focus on strengthening the state as well. We also believe that if you look at some of the big objectives of the just energy transition, lowering of carbon emissions, improving productive capital formation in the energy sector, doing that in a way that promotes equity and justice, and protecting vulnerable communities and employees. On those big items, I genuinely believe, I'm happy to be challenged, but I believe everyone in this room and everyone online are aligned. So that means there's a big opportunity around creating the right level of access for some of these projects and some of these opportunities that are being conceptualized or actually being implemented. All right. So the funding platform, as I mentioned, is going to focus around giving people that opportunity to lodge the projects that they're working on. I think it's going to be very interesting for civil society, because in that space, I can't bucket it easily and say there's going to be 3 or 4 opportunities. I think because of the nature of civil society, firstly, it's a broad spectrum of different institutions. And because of the relationships and trust that you've developed on the ground with different communities, there could be a range of different projects that are being developed right now. And for us, it's about creating the ability for you to access that project. The funding platform will have a process. We're launching it in a week's time in Malahleni. But very importantly, and I think it's around your point around, where are you? We see you at the JTFM, we don't see you again. We're gonna be having extensive workshops with a range of different people, including civil society institutions, around, yes, we've done the big launch, right? We've done the presentation on how the funding platform is going to work. People can go onto the following website. There'll be a portal. You can lodge a project. It'll go through a certain process around making sure that these projects are credible. We don't want to be supporting any nefarious stuff. We want to be supporting good projects. We have a process around that. We onboarded onto a project pipeline, which gives an opportunity for interested grant funders to look at the projects. And if they want to support those projects, we create a match. So we're just matchmaking. Right? We're not intervening, which we felt was quite important. But we are going to be driving a certain direction. And a lot of the funders and a lot of the project implementers have told us that they think the matchmaking mechanism is going to work really well. And that's still to be tested. Right? But I think also what's coming through for me, which is something we really need to get right early on, is we need to engage on the process. So it's one thing talking about a process. We need to engage at a very, very deep level. Right? So we want to use these workshops We still need to set up the dates. We need to lean on some of the people in this room to make sure we get the invite list correct and make sure that everyone is included. And we want to go into detail at those workshops around this is the process of the funding platform. These are the standard operating procedures. This is what the due diligence process looks like, so that you have a really strong sense of the fairness of the process and that you're being treated fairly. But in those workshops, we also want to understand what's going on. You know, what are the projects that are being worked on? Because if there are projects that have been worked on, and we've had this discussion many times, we would really encourage the people behind those projects to leverage the funding platform. As soon as the funding platform is launched, to lodge their project onto the funding platform, so that we can create the visibility to interested funders about these projects, so that I think we can change some of this relevant sentiment around, number one, access to funding, and from a funder point of view, giving a funder better visibility on some of the opportunities that exist across the country and in Mpumalanga. So, Leanne, I'll stop there, but I mean, happy to take follow-on questions as well.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you very much. And there are already some questions coming through in the chat for you as well, so I think we can get to those. But I do also want to give Gail an opportunity to speak. Gail, you're representative of the IPG, and so it would be really good to hear your views on this review process, and if there are any lessons that you've picked up through the process, and maybe from what you've heard from the other panelists that you've heard so far. Are there any best practices that you've come across in relation to CSO oversight and engagement, in relation to the grant projects as well? So if you could answer that, but obviously if you also want to respond to some of what you heard, that would be great. So over to you, Gail.
Thank you very much for inviting me. First of all, I want to say, for us as the UK, but also the IPG, civil society is critically important. We finance civil society, but we strongly believe in it. I've worked in countries where civil society has been more oppressed. So it's you realise when it's missing how important it is. And I welcome the review, and I think, first of all, welcome the fact that the PNU wanted a grant register and that people are reviewing it and reading it. I think it's really important, and I would agree with Jared that there is room for improvement, and we are improving. Our funding processes are all different in each country, and they are incredibly complicated. I haven't spent all my life in development. I was in the private sector beforehand, and it has a ton of acronyms, but it has a ton of process, and some of that process is there really because we are all accountable to our own governments and our own taxpayers, and therefore there's a lot of checks and balances and reviews and approvals before we can. There's a ton of things you have to go before you can get a programme done. Getting a programme done in UK government and approved takes about 2 years if it's a big programme. And there's just a lot, we have log frames, we have just a lot of things. And then I realised that therefore, when we wanted to do something in South Africa, and when we signed the political declaration in 2021, we were all conscious, gosh, we need to move fast. The planet is warming fast. There's a need to do things quickly, and we really wanted to do things, and therefore I think sometimes we've used existing programs. Things come from different places and different directions, and that makes for quite a messy picture. So I think the CSO review is good, and I think everybody we have to do a lot of review processes. We have internal auditors, and then the National Audit Office, and then we have in the UK we have the International Aid Independent Review Committee. And so you're constantly responding to people and filling out documents and schedules and things. And so I think, sometimes I think I can look at the grant register and think, well, that was very clear, because you've raised an issue that isn't very clear. And I think it's definitely brings up things. You asked a couple of questions specifically in the document about the Dutch green hydrogen pieces, for example, and I went back to them and they said, one of them is deliberately we've left it flexible, and almost been penalised a bit for their flexibility. And what they're actually spending it on is I think something people would applaud. So they're very concerned about the water situation with green hydrogen, that we can't make the make the situation worse because the whole of South Africa is water scarce. And they're very well aware of that as a country, like the Netherlands, which is also very small and has very short resources, full stop. So their first piece has actually been studying a piece of work that is studying the potential for other uses of water and how could you regulate and prevent groundwater from being used for green hydrogen. And they're even concerned about grey water usage, for example. So I can see that, actually they're doing something really good, but when you read it, you're like, what else are they going for? So I think what we need to do is perhaps, put more detail in some of the more less specified grant projects, often because they're big and they, you want to allocate that money, and so you allocate it, but then actually it's sometimes deliberately left open to be demand led and find out where the needs are, rather than saying before you come in, I think the needs are this, and so we'll allocate it to that. So overall, yes, the review process. I mean, the grant register is useful for us as development partners as well, because it stops some of the overlap. We are very concerned about duplication. And so we have these development partner coordination committees where we swap all the time, what are we doing? But having the grant register is useful, but we were actually going even more granular amongst ourselves. So we have a list of our energy projects, and then we think over those to make sure we're duplicating, etc. On your question on best practices, I think the one piece, I think you've alluded to it already, but I think hold us on the results. Yeah, I mean, I think results really matter, and I know we've been pushing the PMU to really get going on the targets and actually tell us what the targets are and what the milestones are. We're in year 3 now of the JETP, and it's like we wanted to have, like we have for our projects, we have log frames, and you can, as you can say, go on Dev Tracker and you can see the log frame for the Just Energy Transition Partnership Programme. And we have targets for the amount of GHG emissions we want to achieve at certain dates, reductions, and then the amount of jobs, the amount of policy changes, and I think that's what we need for the overall JET. And that is planned, but for us, it's frustrating we haven't got that yet. We need those milestones, but hold us also on the results of the project. So there's a brilliant set of results put into the key performance indicators put into the implementation plan, but they haven't got figures attached to them. And so we need to start seeing those results reported. Now, a lot of the projects at the moment are studies, which is inevitable at the beginning of a project. We do need to move from those studies to real results on the ground. But we should also be looking at, have certain projects worked. We have actually stopped a few projects because they weren't successful, which is a good thing. We very much believe in learning through failure as the UK. So, but I think we should also, I would have liked as a development professional lab to have seen some evaluations of some of our projects. We haven't had any yet. We've talked a lot. There's a great evaluation expert that works with the PMU in Goldman, and we've talked with him about where we would like to see evaluations and what areas. And I think we particularly want to evaluate the skills side of things, because skills are great, but do skills actually lead to jobs? It can actually make things worse if you train someone, give them the expectation that they're going to get a job installing solar, but then they don't get a job. That's even worse, yeah? So, and actually the evidence on skills programs working in the development sector is quite weak overall, which is why we as the UK we're not putting a lot of money into it. But it would be good to see some more evaluation. So I think, actually hold us to account on this. Ask us, ask us and the PMU, what are we aiming for? What are our milestones? Where do you expect yourself to see in 2 years' time? I think overall, also hold us to account on the big aim for 2 reasons, because it matters for the planet, but also because it matters for civil society, and I'm going to explain why. So the overall JETP is linked to the upper ambition of the NDC, which is, to get to 350, it's imprinted in my brain, by 2030 or thereabouts. And I know that we've been in a really difficult situation with load shedding, and therefore we've seen a disappointing extension of the coal plants, and we understand that. But that doesn't mean we should stop looking at the target, and it doesn't mean we should give up hope. And the question is, what can we achieve, and where will we get to? And we're just at a really critical point at the moment where South Africa will write its new NDC. It has to put it up to COP on the 17th of November. And we need an ambitious NDC, because I just read the report that there's a 7% chance now of hitting 2 degrees. I mean, it's at 1.5 degrees. So we're very likely in a 2-degree world. And that's horrific, right? That's horrific for communities. But the other reason this matters, right, is if we don't see the emission reductions happening, it'd be very difficult for us to get more grant money. So when we go to our ministers and we say, can we have more grant for South Africa, they need to see progress on the emissions in order to give grant, which could go to communities, etc. And that's particularly difficult now with the coal life extension, because they're saying, well, the coal plants are closed until 2030, and now they're going to close them anyway. And, therefore it becomes really hard to sell for us to get more money. And we are in a very difficult budget situation at the moment. So the Germans have budget cuts, the Dutch have budget cuts. We've got budget cuts next year on our bilateral aid, not so much on our multilateral. So, for all of us, being able to demonstrate some results, and that we're really being rigorous on the methodology and what I call value for money. We're fixated on value for money in the UK government. So we're always trying to count, how many jobs did we get for our pounds? How many tons of carbon did we get for our pounds? And I think having those value for money metrics and actually being able to say what results have we achieved will really help us in getting more money for South Africa. Yeah. And on the green hydrogen, I think, I understand why it's a difficult area, and 140 million looks like a lot of money, doesn't it? I do wonder, though, just thinking the way things work, that in particular, I'd say with countries in the European Union, there is a big, and the Dutch and the Germans, etc., are very keen on green hydrogen. And if the money didn't go to South Africa for green hydrogen, it would probably go somewhere else. It wouldn't be like that one would go into communities, because they've probably got a green hydrogen budget. Yeah. And so I think the issue is that, be careful about criticizing it too much, because they may say, well, just won't do South Africa, we'll do Namibia instead. And it does have a really important role for the hardcore bait industries. The steel industry needs something like green hydrogen. And there are some other industries that it's really difficult to find other solutions for, because they use such large amount of industrial heat in particular, and they just need very powerful energy. So you don't want those to close unnecessarily. And an export industry is also not a bad thing to have when your other export industries may be declining. But there is a balance, which I think we take on board, between making sure the green hydrogen is A, done well, B, and involves the communities and doesn't use too much water, and then also all of the issues about the proportion spent on green hydrogen, and does it is it going back to Germany or whatever rather than to South Africa. So we also did ask the question, and this is where you can see your review is effective. We asked Germany, why Sasol? And they said, because green hydrogen is a very, very difficult area at the moment, and it is very much in the feasibility stage. A bit like if you went 15 years ago, wind was offshore wind. Onshore wind was proven, but offshore wind wasn't. And so, it needs huge amounts of capex and quite a lot of technical experience. And there aren't a lot of companies in South Africa that could do that. Sasol does have the Fisher, for all its faults and all its, has the Fisher-Tropsch experience, and so that's why they went with Sasol. So they've given I think quite a valid answer on that one as to why Sasol. We are all, but I don't think any of us are big fans of the Sasol emissions. But all of us also feel concerned about the lack of clarity on their long-term plans. But at the same time, the particular project they looked at was for new types of kerosene, and Sasol was the potential player. So it's that one. But yeah, just generally, I mean, there's lots and lots of points I could come back on, but I'm conscious of time.
Yeah.
But feel free. I think on things like linking to the contracts, we're going to go away and think what we can do. I'm not sure the contracts themselves are very interesting, to be honest. They're all templates, and there's a long, lots of sort of anti-fraud clauses and data protection clauses, and they're very standard. I think the question is what is most useful for you to see. And I think if we had a website at the PMU, we could put a lot of studies on there. We tried to create an internal website amongst the IPG, and then it went to massive technical problems that some people were using Google Meet, and some people using Teams, and it just never worked. We couldn't get to see each other's documents, which was deeply frustrating. But I do think a PMU website would help us, because we didn't want to set our own up. We thought that would be like usurping the role of South Africa. But a website would help us with swapping reports. So, for example, we did a feasibility study on invasive plants in Mpumalanga and whether they could be used for biomass energy. That kind of study, you know, actually it's not led to anything, but maybe somebody, if we put it out there, somebody would use it.
Yeah.
But also for putting out the calls for proposals. So at the moment, we're emailing around the calls for proposals. So when people have an open call for grants or something, we're sort of emailing them around you. But actually, it would be great if they were up on the website. And I'm really conscious of that. You know, how do we make some of our funding more available? I think the funding platform is really important, but we should also promote some more of the things. So that I think we emailed around the USAID one. There's a UK Pact call for proposals in January, which will be very broad and very open, and we will email that round. Yeah.
Thanks, Gail. Yeah, I do want to move on to get to some more questions, but Jared, do you want to come in very quickly just on the green hydrogen? And then I have a lot of questions from the chat, but feel free to add more, and then we'll throw it open a bit. So
yeah. I mean, I just realized, I mean, I think Gail's may help me remember a few of the questions raised that I can actually respond to, and I should. So I mean, let's use the green hydrogen point. I thought Gail's reflection on the fact that, you know, if it didn't go to South Africa, they would have gone elsewhere because the funder mandate was on green hydrogen development is a really important one, because I think she's also highlighted the fact that different funders have different mandates. Now, I actually want to bring it up in a positive context to say one of the objectives of the funding platform is how do we address that by bringing more funders to the table? Because if we have more funders, then we have different mandates, right? So your point is, why did so much of money go to green hydrogen? I think we should be asking why is money not going to the other areas as well? And one of the answers to that is some of our local funders. We should also be looking at international donors and philanthropies, but I think a lot of our local funders can contribute to what you're pointing out as well, and they have the mandates to do that. So we hope with the funding platform we'll create a mechanism and a process where local funders can participate at a much greater scale in terms of directing funding to areas where it's needed. That was the one point I just wanted to make. The second is I think this point on transparency and progress is really important. So in the same spirit as the grant register, you'll see in the next few months the JETP system, which Gail's alluded to. You'll see the concessional loan register. And I think the commercial investment register may take a bit longer, because when we get to commercial investments, there's a range of different institutions, private sector institutions that are participating in that space. So it may take us a bit longer to get all the information collected, make sure it's consistent, etc., and then articulated by a register. But I think in the next few months you'll see the M&E system, and the concessional loan register, which I think were very, very specific questions that were asked. And I think it's going to be great to see, you know, similar types of approaches where people go through the information and then provide feedback. I just wanted to highlight those 2 points.
No, thank you, Jared. That's great. All right, we've got about 15 minutes left in our session, and then I'm quite keen to close up on time if we can. And I'd also like to just spend 2 or 3 minutes wrapping up. So I want to just first come to people in the room. Are there any questions in the room? And then I'll like to come to some of the questions that have been put in the chat. Are there any questions in the room? Yes, sorry, and maybe if you could just introduce yourself, just so we know where you
based in from Olifants Branch. My question is to PMU. How complex is it to build your systems into our current IDPs? Because in our localities, got annual IDPs that they've got Apex project and Apex project. So from your systems, how complicated is it that you can build in so that the information gets shared? It's what happens with our IDP projects, because the IDP are done on a one-to-one basis. So now it will probably, instead of you creating something new, you can hop on to a pre-existing system in the municipal level. And the other question that I wanted to find out is, how possible is it that current projects that are in place are corporate social responsibility projects of the emitters in terms of running? Because we in the grassroots, as I'm talking about the IDPs, we are practical people, so we engage on real time information. So with the current state of affairs, and these CSI projects, so whoever is in that space of manufacturing, doing whatever, mining and stuff like that, such that with our current state of law of getting of information, they can use the Copy Act to say that is our personal CSI or CSI. So on your register, when you are getting the information, that's just packaging this, you receive the mechanism refining that says this is CSI project, it's a project.
Take a few questions, or should I just?
I think you can answer that.
Yeah. So I think, the first point around integration. I guess there's integration on a practical level around what's happening from an IDP that a municipality is thinking about implementing. What we've been finding in our engagements with the municipalities, and I haven't engaged with all the municipalities, I'll be very clear. The ones that I have engaged with have said that, some of the stuff they've identified in the IDP, there's an element of feasibility work that still needs to be done around that, because there's either feasibility or there's a capacity gap because they may not have all the resources. And they've been engaging with us to say, at that level, at the practical level, how can we use this funding platform to make our request known, and then for potential interested funders to support us. I think your other point on just the system integration is a really important point. To date, we found system integration quite difficult because we find different institutions, whether it be government or otherwise, but even within government are using different systems. But it's a very important objective, I think. So it's something we should be actively working on. But I'd be lying if I tell you we've made huge strides on that at this point in time. The second point, I think, is also a very interesting question. At the moment, we haven't really had to deal with it because a lot of the grant register information, as I mentioned, has been information from funders, predominantly the international partners, right? So not really the local corporates. I want that to change. I think the local corporates and I think the local sources of grant funding should be supporting the JET. Now, one of the ways we want them to do that is through the funding platform. And that gives us an ability to in the right way, raise the points you're making and obtain the right level of commitment that these projects and the money is being spent in a way that's aligned to our principles around equity and justice. But on the grant register to date, we don't have many of those examples. And I think to your point, as it changes, and we hope it changes, we have an opportunity to report on that. We have an opportunity in a year's time to sit and reflect on it. And we have an opportunity with the funding platform to provide better guidance and then hold local funders, I think, to a high moral level on the JET. Thanks.
Thanks, Sharon. So we've got a number of questions, and I'm going to come to Clement and then Thomas online. I'll come back to the room and then take one final question from Amanda, and then we'll wrap up there. I also just want to acknowledge that there are a number of questions in the chat, and there have been questions about where we got the information from. And I'm sorry that Henry, who asked that question, has left because she's from Indonesia, and I think it would be good to get their perspective of what's been happening with their JETP. We won't have that opportunity this time, but also just around the clarity or the list of criteria for accepting projects. And we had a question around that. I think that'll come up in the launch next week, I hope. So we will circulate that. And then also a question around whether the funded studies have all been industry studies or whether they've been CSO or community studies. So I'm not going, and then lastly, how we get invitations to these events directly. And we'll continue to try and put that out there as well, but just to at least register that these are questions that are coming through the chat. So do you want to?
I'll try and be quick, but I think I was going to call it housekeeping, like, like around what we do. And Gail was right, a website will help meaningfully. And we are at the final stages of developing our website. And that then gives us a comms medium, right, to put out a lot of this information for the benefit of different stakeholders, whether it be invites, whether it be reports. It's also going to be, the website's going to house the link for the funding platform portal. So I think just to give people comfort that that's coming online very soon, and we'll address some of the questions.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Joe. So if we can go to Clement, if you're able to come on and speak, and then we'll go to Thomas. We'll come back to the room. Over to you, Clement.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible enough?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Clement from Grassroots Level 4 Climate Action. It's a nice discussion and it's a nice collaboration. Thank you all South Africans who are in this meeting, in this, moving forward the transition for us all. I just want to ask the PMU office, because we need the manager, Mr. Rudy, to always be in our meetings. Because we always attend with the PCC, because we represent all the provinces in South Africa. Now we want him to come because we need clarity, as Andile and my sister, Comrade, have told you before. Now, for us, we have to be careful, because now we have seen the examples of projects that have been placed. They are planned. Project, they are pledged project, they are implemented project, and they are already completed project without the consultation of the community, the people who are suffering and who need this transition. And what I want to know, the criteria of the allocated funds, the PMU said it will publish it during the course of 2024, but already the other projects have been completed. And the allocated funding, it's National Treasury is responsible, because the allocators are the donors themselves. You see, you can't be a referee and a player at the same time. Now when we speak, the donors are the themselves. It's unfair for us as the community and the poor. And the JETP PMU is working to improve this access for this coming launch, because this launch, they have said they will launch it on October, because this ET funding platform, it's very important for us. We need to, with immediate effect, we need civil society to be the representatives inside the platform, because already they have chosen their constituents. But the main function of the funding platform is to be a matchmaker between suppliers of grant funding and potential JET project beneficiaries, which means us, a community. It's gonna make us to mesh in them. And it's not a fund. They say it's not a fund. To provide preparation support services to the JET project originators to help them prepare plans and apply for grants, which means they must help the community and they must not help the people who is already, we can see they are installing the solars, they are doing the hydrogen without knowing, because already hydrogen is going outside the country. To provide the public with regular analysis of the deployment of grant funds to the JETP project. We want regular because they say they will update it quarterly. That's why we need the manager to come and account. The JET funding advisory committee has been established. You see, that's the meeting last on the 2nd. They've established the advisory committee without consulting us, with members, broadly representatives of civil society. We don't know which civil society, labor, business, and government. Now, me, I'm worried for the community because even my township, they ask me, we can see now there's a lot of solars coming here. How are we funding? Because I always bring a message to the constituents. How are we going to, because we need also the solar heaters the solar geysers in our townships. But it's unfair for us because already the funding have been allocated, but without us knowing, without even being consulted. And the main thing which makes me worry, the keys.
Sorry, David, we're short on time, so could you wrap up?
Okay, yes, the KISS funding must not always, because SBNFIN must not always sponsor ESCOM, because ESCOM also get the funding. They make the tariff high now, but where that money goes, we have to account and know how the money is, because they've given the money by the KISS. That's why I'm very worried about how they can start putting the platform after they have implemented the funding mechanism. Thanks.
Thanks, Clement. Thomas, could you also ask your question? We'll try and take all of the questions and then just have a final round of responses, if that's okay. So, Thomas, over to you, and please keep it short if you can.
I will try, Glenn. Thanks, and afternoon, everyone. So, Glenn, firstly, key to my concern, and I think Michelle touched on this when she opened, that we need to have procedural justice. I think we need to acknowledge that the final implementation plan never followed a process of thorough engagement. The whole project development process was flawed. Somebody just came in and said, we will impose green hydrogen to you, we will impose electric vehicles to you, and those things do not speak to the needs of the communities. So I think we need to be frank and revisit the project development process. Are ordinary people informing the final product of the Just Investment Plan, or are the donors coming to South Africa to impose on us? And we need to be clear. The UNFCCC, in its part of it, in its approach with the $1 billion to $1 trillion project, they want to mobilize funds, whether in grants or loans. They want to mobilize funds for infrastructure development, and that infrastructure does not speak to ordinary people. It speaks to how businesses can invest through de-risking, through government taking the risk, and then in that way they make money. So I think we need to be clear as to what exactly is the purpose of this donor, taking into consideration the fact that the conditions of this donor funding are also being imposed by the donors, not the recipient. The donors come in with the donor funding, whether it be a grant or a loan. That's why we see people pumping more money into green hydrogen, even though local people say, what is green hydrogen? You know, not even why do we finance it? What is green hydrogen and how does it speak to me? So for me, I think there's a problem with that. Secondly, the issue of implementing agents. I think we need to be clear. How much are they costing us? Because all of this money is coming to play, but it doesn't reach the intended beneficiaries. It doesn't reach the communities. Most of that money is being absorbed by implementing agents. So I think we need to be very open around that to say, how do we ensure that this money goes to community people, and we cut the process of implementing agents. And if you want to see, look at Komati and look at Grootvlei. You will see that there's a lot of implementing agents in that spaces. There's a lot of money that went to Grootvlei and Komati, but how much of that money has trickled down to community people? Currently, none, because all of that money is being absorbed by implementing agents. So for me, I think it's important that we also scrutinize the role of the PMU. Is the PMU becoming a side hustle of the treasury? Because all of these funds are being controlled through the PMU and they report directly to the presidency. What is the role of national treasury? Because we've got national treasury. Or are we creating a parallel system within our government system wherein the PMU will receive these funds and dictate how these funds are being repaid? Yet, on the other hand, our own government needs to make sure that they take the risk of all of these funds that are being pumped into the country. So for me, I think the role of the PMU is.
Thanks, Thomas. Thank you for that. I think we got those 2 points. Armando, can I come to you? And again, as briefly as you can, and then we'll get a last round of responses, and then we'll wrap up. So to you, Armando.
Sure, no problem. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. First of all, thank you to the panelists and for the presentation. It's been very interesting. I have 2 questions. One is for Gail. I was quite surprised to see the UK's Market Accelerator for Green Construction, or MAGIC for short, program listed in the grant register, given that the MAGIC program is structured more as concessional funds for IFC's blended finance projects rather than direct grants. So my question is, why is this being mapped as part of the UK's IPG grant pledges? And especially because the MAGIC program that started in 2018 predates the 2021 IPG pledges and is not even South African specific. And maybe if I can just build on that to ask Gail if in her opinion, whether it's concessional or grant funds, are these the best used for funds being used for institutions like the World Bank to blend financing or advisory projects for very large financial institutions in South Africa, such as Nedbank, ABSA, and FNB. My second question is for Jared. As we saw in the presentation, grants make up a very small portion of the total pledge. I think it was 5%. This is very concerning. And even more worrying is to see that programs or projects like MAGIC, for example, that predate the pledge are being earmarked as part of the grant commitments. So this would suggest that the actual amount of new grants or grant money is even smaller in practice. So my question is, how can we ensure that programs are actually mapped and that they don't undermine the transparency and the effectiveness of grant pledging? Ensuring that grants are actually directed towards NGOs and civil society and not larger institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Armando. So could I start with Gail and just come down and ask also Andile, Kgalelo, and then Jared just for their final reflections?
Sure. On MAGIC, so on all of our programs, in fact, we have prorated and only counted any money that came in after November 2021. Actually also applies to our loans as well, actually, the equity stuff with Global Bank, for example. We have not counted some of the early bid window stuff, for example. We said, no, we're not counting that. So it is very strictly. So the question is, and we only count the country element. So MAGIC is a multi-country program, as are several of ours. We'll only count the South African piece, not the other pieces. While it ends up being a blended finance instrument, the UK contribution is entirely grant, which is why we put it in the grant register. So that, as opposed to putting it in the loan piece, because for us it's a grant. As to the effectiveness, which I think yours, is it the best thing to basically reduce the cost of lending for ABSA and Nedbank? It is a temporary measure. The plan is in the long run that they would, this program will only be successful, MAGIC, if actually we stop funding and the banks start doing this by themselves. So the rationale behind it, as I understand it, is that ABSA and Nedbank would not have lent to low-income housing in Joburg on their own and done energy efficiency. They might have lent in some areas, but they wouldn't have done the energy efficiency piece because they didn't have the experience in it. And it wouldn't have been as poor housing, if you like, housing for as poor people, I couldn't think of the way to phrase it, if they hadn't had our element. But we are very much watching, like, will this continue? And actually, we've been a bit on the back of IFC, because we also get to see all their projects that go to the board, and we have queried the last two IFC projects, which were nothing to do with Magic, but which were just general loans to the banks, as to whether actually South Africa's banks need that. Is that the best use of IFC funding at the moment? I think, you should see us stepping back from a lot of this work, really. I think, this Magic is largely achieved its goal, is my view. So there are a lot of other countries that need funding as well. So Magic may withdraw that funding from South Africa and shift elsewhere. I don't know. It's run through DESNES rather than FCDO, so it's a different department. The tricky thing is that if we do blended finance, there are a very limited amount of institutions we can do it with because of our rules around managing debt. We don't have the only lending facility we have is BII. So we can do it through BII, we could do it through Financial Sector Deepening Africa. IFC is another one because we cannot manage, we don't have a lending team in FCDO or DESNES. So we have to go through a reputable institution that can monitor and manage those loans, which are multi-unit, often 10, 15-year loans, and need to be managed and accounted for, etc. Hence the choice of IFC. And it is supposed to have that role in the long run where basically the banks do it on their own. That's my thing.
Thanks, Gail. Thanks very much. India?
But for me, in closing, I think we should look at the reformation of the system, of how funds are allocated and the reporting. That's all. For now, I think we welcome the efforts, but we can do better. We can do much better, and we can work closely with the tagging system, like you were saying earlier on about matchmaking. So when we matchmake from the beginning, from the onset, and it's going to be proper for us to have the tagging system that is very transparent and visible to our people, and we can see the results, the end results here. Thank you.
Thanks.
And for me, in closing, I would like to say to the BMU and the other parties involved if they don't have a system in place, because currently it seems like the funders they can pick and choose who to fund. Because as I heard, I don't know if I heard correctly, the BMU is just there to do the matchmaking, but they don't really have a say to say, do you fund or you can fund this project. So I think there must be a system in place if there is none currently, so that the funders that don't get to pick and choose. Because what I'm saying that is they can probably choose to fund their own projects, like they're currently doing now. The middlemen, or say the intermediaries, they choose who the money should go through. So I think there should be that system in place.
Thank you. Jared.
Yeah, quite a few points. Also, I'm going to try and address the points raised by Clement and Thomas as well. I'm going to start with a light comment. One of my mentors the other day told me the opposite of darkness is not strength, it's light. So I'll start with a light comment. Rudy Dix is only one person, right? So, I think I'm amazed at how Rudy gets himself to join so many sessions, to engage with so many people. I think it really speaks a lot for his character, just how strong his desire and intent is on the JET. But I think the point coming through is we need to really improve on our comm strategy and our engagement strategy, right? So we need to be part of the collaboration, and visible point is we need to be there. And from a funding platform point of view, we are going to be really focused on demonstrating that to people early on, that we're going to be coming and engaging on the process and getting feedback around how we can make this better, which speaks to, I think Thomas made a point around friction costs and project preparation. Project preparation is going to be very important. And how do we address project preparation without introducing friction costs? Because there's a major risk there that we actually, by addressing the one, we create the other. And I think we're really going to need some of the knowledge and support from communities on that, which is why I think my first point on engagement is going to be so important. And I think civil society organizations have a role to play in that as well, around getting to more efficient but more meaningful project prep solutions to get these projects visible to funders. Then I think we don't go and direct funders, but we must continue to engage with funders to say these are projects that have come onto the funding platform post a process being done. These are good projects. What is happening? Yeah, like why are you not funding them? And I want to continue that line of thought because I think Armando raised a question around grants being a small portion of the total $100 billion investment requirement. It doesn't surprise me. Okay, I'm from a finance background, so I know that a lot of the money in circulation right now, I think 97% of it is credit. So it's not surprising to me that a lot of it is like your grant component is often quite small. But it also means that grant component is very, very precious, right? And one of the opportunities we see when we bring these projects onto the funding platform is we want to engage with a funder set that goes beyond the international partner group. We still going to engage with the international partner group, but we also want to be engaging with our local funders because the messaging we've got from local funders is that they do want to support the JET. They just don't yet know how to, because it's such a new topic. And when we speak to them about the funding platform, they say this is a fantastic idea because it allows us to get sight on a project pipeline, but to develop our own knowledge of this so that we can start going and proactively funding good projects on the ground. So those are my closing comments, and I hope it's addressed some of the points that have been raised.
Thank you, Joe. That was a tough task, but thank you. Leanne, you wanted to make some last comments and then for Bryce.
No, thank you, Glenn. I just wanted to say, from a LAC and Life After Coal and Fair Finance Coalition perspective, we will also look at how do we continue to bridge this gap and, think about, are there sections of our website that we can ensure that some of the questions raised here, for example, at the chat, there's some sort of feedback loop. That is the one thing that we're taking on and figuring out how to do. And on the project outcomes, I think one simple way to address it right now is if you have links to, let's say, project documents and project outcomes, link it into the grant mapping register so we can see where is that project, where is the report or the research outcome, and you can see it in relation to specific allocations. That's a simple fix, I think, for now that could happen. And I just wanted to say just a huge thank you to everybody. I'm sure Glenn is going to repeat this, but it really has been an incredible conversation. I hope we can have more of these, and I hope we can figure out how to address some of the concerns that have been raised around, is this a South African-led process? And is that process then also led by community visions for just transition? And how do we get that right? Because even if you have donor countries that have their vision, that could undermine a local vision. That's the point I think that local communities are bringing into the space to say, yes, we may not have had the green hydrogen money, and there are complexities to that, but the visions don't coincide necessarily, and we need to consider that very carefully. But yeah, over to you, Glenn.
Thank you, Leanne. I won't repeat your thanks. Thank you to everyone who's been here. I won't go to people individually, but we really appreciate it. I'll be as brief as possible. We will send the slides to those online. If you registered with your email address, you should have registered with the email address. We will send it to that email address. If you want it sent to a different one, please just drop it in the chat and we'll capture that. We'll also share the invitation to the funding platform launch, as well as the recording. I'm not quite sure how we'll do that, but we'll find a way and share that as well. So please make sure we've got your contact details. I also just do want to thank the Ford Foundation who've hosted us here today very generously. So thank you to them. They aren't in the room, but I'll convey that to them too. If you have any feedback for us, probably one of the easiest ways, both the LAC, Life After Coal and Fair Finance Coalition websites are there, and there are ways to contact us through that. But also the email address for the coalition, the Fair Finance Coalition, is info@fairfinancecoalitionsouthernafrica.org. So you're very welcome to send feedback there. And then lastly, just for the panelists in the room, and maybe Michelle will find a way to get you on there. So Michelle, if you could stay on a bit, we'd just like to take a quick photo before you leave, so we can do that. And for those of you in the room, we do have some food outside and drinks, so please feel free to partake in that. And yeah, just again, thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate it, particularly Leanne, for all the work you put into this launch, Livia online as well for your research that fueled it. We very much appreciate it, and I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you. Great. The panel stand in front.
Hi, Michelle. Your face is going to be very large in the photo.
Can the panel please stand in front of the TV with Michelle, and we'll take a quick photo.
Like photoshops everybody into one.
Tell you what I'll do. We got you a little bit smaller by turning on my video, so we'll just have a smaller you there.
Oh, yeah, please have a small me.
Can someone take a photo? You happy to, Shalika? Thank you.
Me too.
I'm sorry, Michelle. We were supposed to hand over to you for final remarks, and Ken forgot your blame.
Maybe.
No, it's okay. Thanks for bringing me in, Leanne.
Just want to get the photo.
Oh no, Michelle should be
Stand in front of Lynn.
Well done, everyone.
Thanks, Michelle. Well done to you.
Manage.
Civil society can do anything, Jared. Just give us a chance.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good.
Thanks.
Michelle.
Oh.
Thank you, Shandika.
Be enthusiastic.
There's some cheese when you send her cheese.
Cheese. Thank
you so much. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Michelle.
Just thank you, Angela. Always such a pleasure.
Angela, did you have to come back? Ah, okay. Where did you pay from? Oh, that's okay. I just came on the We've got another one coming up. So the next meeting we're planning for is October.
I will see you in October.
No, end of October. Yeah, we're going to do. So Bello, my colleague, is organising this. Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm saying in the chat.
Yeah, let's do.